Within the gilded pavilions of Emperor Constans II, where flickering candles danced upon ancient Mediterranean charts, a single name redrew the jagged borders of imperial terror nightly. Though Roman tongues struggled to utter his name, their trembling fingers lingered upon his territory across maps, as if touching a festering wound within their ancient empire. Abdullah ibn Saad, a fierce prince of the nascent caliphate, bore the Almighty's mandate upon waves, despite hailing from sands where water was merely a phantom flood. No legacy of timber or sail graced his desert lineage, yet he stood commanding a Leviathan fleet that now threatened the very jugular of the Eastern Roman Empire. The cold iron within his gaze was forged not by whetstones, but by an indomitable faith transforming desert nomads into maritime masters of the deep blue abyss. His stature embodied the desert's vast patience, while his command echoed like a gale howling through narrow stone canyons, resonating with a terrifying and absolute military authority. Chronicles recount that as he surveyed his armada, the roaring tides fell silent, and warriors listened with the heavy stillness of men facing an inescapable and glorious destiny. His obsidian banner fluttered with regal indifference atop the flagship, contrasting against the frantic Byzantine masts gathering upon the distant horizon like a gathering storm of iron. Commanding an inexperienced fleet upon unfamiliar tides against an ancient maritime hegemon, the commander maintained a chillingly confident smile that defied all logic of conventional naval warfare. For this vanguard, the ocean was no ancestral inheritance but a divine mandate, harboring a spiritual weapon within his breast far more lethal than 1,000 rowing oars. He architected the coming slaughter like a fortress, scrutinizing every structural weakness as a lethal opportunity, realizing true genius lies within the complexity of the hidden snare. He watched 1,000 Byzantine vessels approach like a relentless deluge, while conceiving a stratagem the sea had never witnessed, a terrestrial slaughter waged upon the waves. The year was 34 of the Hijra, and the world bore witness to a fated crossroads where a fledgling fleet encountered an empire that ruled these waters. The Byzantine Empire was no mere state, it was the living memory of Rome, Alexander's heir, and the guardian of the most sacred naval arsenals ever known. 1,000 warships, an unthinkable armada of Lebanese cedar, propelled by countless oars and manned by professional killers who inherited the dark arts of maritime warfare through generations. Constans II himself, the crowned Caesar, assumed command upon his deck, a rare act of imperial desperation reserved only for the final total annihilation of a rising foe. From his gilded height, Caesar looked upon the modest Islamic fleet with the arrogance of a predator eyeing easy prey, committing his first and most fatal error. The Mediterranean that summer was vast as Byzantine ambition, yet silent with the deceptive calm that precedes a storm known only to the abyss and the gods. The nascent Islamic armada possessed neither centuries of naval tradition nor soldiers who had learned to walk upon the shifting tides before they could stand on sand. 200 ships, that was the entirety of Ibn Abisar's strength against a tenfold horde, a mathematical certainty of total defeat in every human calculation ever recorded. Yet war is never forged upon static equations. It thrives on the variables of burning spirits and cunning minds that rewrite reality through the fires of faith. The shores of Egypt and the Levant, where Muawiyah gazed toward the horizon's promise, provided the lifeblood of Coptic and Syrian sailors who gave this fleet rhythm. Alexandrian mariners, raised on the Nile's ebbs, carried a primal wisdom of navigation absent from Byzantine academies. These men were the secret, volatile ammunition of the Arab commander. Currents, winds, and hidden shoals, these were the invisible legions known only to the deep, and Ibn Abisar knew these primordial forces would fight for his cause. Defeat was etched clearly upon every military chart of that era, but the commander carried an unwritten lexicon within his mind, scripted in the ink of hope. Byzantium believed this clash would extinguish the desert knight's maritime dreams forever, unaware they were marching toward a cataclysmic crossroads from which their empire would never return. In the heavy silence of the eve of battle, the commander gathered his captains, their eyes fixed upon Byzantine lights flickering on the horizon like malicious stars. The leader spoke with a voice like steady iron. "We shall not fight upon the water as sailors do. We shall fight as masters of solid earth." He commanded the ships be lashed together with thick ropes and heavy chains, transforming 200 vessels into a singular, floating fortress, a continent built upon the waves. This simple stratagem was a miracle of tactical subversion. By negating naval maneuverability, he transformed the abyss into a static battlefield where the Muslims were peerless masters. The bound armada appeared from afar like an iron island rising from the azure deep, drawing the Byzantine fleet into the reach of Islamic steel without warning. In the year 34, within the waters of Lycia near Anatolian shores, the armadas collided as the sun cast long grim shadows over a landscape of doom. The wind shifted erratically as if choosing sides in this birth of a new age, finally holding their breath to witness the impending moment of absolute rupture. Ibn Abi Sa'r roared his final command, "Advance until wood grinds against wood, then descend upon them like riders upon crippled horses. Do not fight the sea, ride it." A thunderous cry of takbir erupted from 5,000 throats, shattering the salt-heavy air above a Mediterranean that had never heard a sound of such spiritual weight. Iron grappling hooks soared like the talons of starving hawks, biting into Byzantine hulls as hundreds of powerful arms pulled the two empires into a singular embrace. The Byzantine sailor, prepared for a naval duel, found himself trapped in a land war. Wooden bridges linked the ships as Muslim warriors crossed with steady steps. Imperial naval expertise vanished in an instant, for the struggle became a claustrophobic slaughter on narrow decks where the sharpened blade silenced the science of the oar. The Byzantine collapse began not from the depths but upon the decks. Islamic veterans of land conquests were maestros of this brutal close-quarters combat that oceans couldn't stop. Constans II, the emperor, who donned his armor to lead 1,000 sails, watched his nautical doctrine crumble before an opponent who rewrote the rules of the sea. The air above the Battle of the Masts grew thick with the smoke of burning cedar, the screams of the dying, and the cacophony of iron striking wood. Flight was no longer an option within this floating snare. The lashed ships denied all maneuver, rendering the massive Byzantine fleet a prisoner of its own overwhelming size. Byzantine vessels began to break away, each seeking individual salvation, but this frantic desertion shattered their cohesion, turning 1,000 ships into 1,000 stories of defeat. The terror sweeping through the retreating Roman ranks was not the fear of drowning, but the horror of a warrior realizing his judgment had been passed. The commander stood upon his unified bridge like a mountain, watching a storm, issuing calm orders with the certainty that the battle was won the moment chains held. Caesar abandoned his flagship wounded and fled the carnage while his fleet disintegrated around him. That imperial retreat signaled the total and final collapse of the line. In the heart of chaos, where smoke blurs the line between sea and sky, the true distinction between a visionary strategist and a collapsing administrator becomes painfully clear. Abdullah ibn Saad moved across his deck with calculated precision, treating the surrounding slaughter not as chaos, but as a symphony whose dark rhythm he alone mastered. The Muslims fighting upon those decks were not professional sailors by Roman standards. They were believers who carried a conviction heavier than any tactical manual in existence. The will that drives a man across a narrow wooden plank over a turbulent abyss toward an awaiting sword cannot be taught in academies. It is born. One fleet was driven by imperial fear for a throne, the other by the certainty of a divine mission. In the narrow field of death, faith prevails. The doctrine produced at DHAT AL-SAWARI was no mere trick. It was a timeless principle. Forge the battlefield that suits your strength and deny the enemy advantage. The masts of the ships tangled, splintered, and fell like forest trees in a hurricane, earning the battle. Its name, DHAT AL-SAWARI, the mistress of the shattered masts. The vista before the commander's eyes shifted from a terrifying armada to a mosaic of burning timber, colliding hulls, and Byzantine banners sinking slowly into the abyss. When the waters finally settled after the engagement, the silence was not one of peace, but of profound, paralyzing Shaka Byzantine trauma that would haunt their courts. The armada that left Constantinople to crush the rising giant returned with punctured hulls, broken spirits, and a wounded emperor clutching the leaking lifeblood of his pride. DHAT AL-SAWARI was more than a naval victory. It was the formal declaration of a new maritime power and the birth of an Islamic presence in the Mediterranean. When news reached the Caliphate's capital, it carried more than military triumph. It confirmed that this nation of revelation knew no impossible when the Almighty ordained it. The geopolitical scales of the Mediterranean flipped in a single day. The Roman Lake of Antiquity became a contested sea, then an Islamic waterway through the coming centuries. Syrian, Egyptian, and North African coasts began to breathe a new maritime freedom, as if a heavy stone had been lifted from their chests, revealing the open horizon. Constans II returned to his capital bearing a defeat that altered the destiny of his reign, dying not just from physical wounds, but from the unhealable laceration. Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan received the tidings in Damascus with the eyes of a visionary witnessing the realization of a dream he had long defended before the caliphs. The commander did not press toward Constantinople in that campaign, as if destiny wished this victory to remain pure in history, untainted by the complexities of siege. The mental barrier preventing desert sons from becoming masters of the sea was shattered on Lycia's shores. Thereafter, the Islamic ship became a symbol of the achieved impossible. The tactic of lashing ships together was not a desperate improvisation for lack of experience, but the seed of a naval doctrine that would endure for centuries. Military genius does not require matching the enemy's tools. It requires transforming the absence of those tools into a weapon that confuses every imperial plan based upon them. In the modern war academies of Ankara and Istanbul, this tactic is studied as the mastery of environmental coercion, acknowledging that the commander won because he thought deeper. Better for a warrior to fight with faith while lacking tools than to fight with tools while lacking a heart of certainty. This is the language of Sawari. The Islamic fleet that emerged victorious from that slaughter was forever changed, possessing a new identity and an entirely different understanding of what it meant to walk waves. The Mediterranean witnessed an unstoppable Islamic expansion following this victory, Cyprus, Crete, Sicily, and Al-Andalus all carrying the genetic tactical code of that fateful day in Lycia's waters. The Byzantine Empire never truly recovered its geopolitical dominance. The sea that once served as its southern shield became a permanent arena of threat, draining its treasuries. Constantinople's Golden Gates looked upon the horizon with newfound anxiety. Whenever news of an Islamic fleet arrived, the guards remembered DHAT al-SAWARI and their iron hands trembled. The memory of the Islamic conquests is not limited to land alone. DHAT al-SAWARI declared that the nation of revelation could seize sovereignty over earth, air, and water. The name of Abdullah ibn Saad is etched in fire upon the maritime charts of the ancient world, not merely as a warrior, but as the first admiral. His brilliance lay not in the iron he struck, but in the strategy he conceived, the difference being between an emperor who fights and a leader who wins. Later, naval doctrines, Barossa, Piri Reis, Sinan Pasha all spring from the root planted in the waters of DHAT al-SAWARI, where a man of the desert taught the sea. History shows no mercy to nations that forget they were once masters. In this battle lies a memory waiting to be read anew in every modern military academy. The Mediterranean, which witnessed the Byzantine collapse, still waits with the patience of geography and the dignity of the depths for the one who raises the banner. This is the lesson left by the commander to the generations, not in a book, but in waters that bore witness in masts that shattered under imperial hubris. The Caesar did not lose because his army was smaller. He lost because his adversary was wise enough to grasp the difference between performative numbers and lethal planning. The siege resisted at DHAT al-SAWARI was not that of Byzantine ships, but the global expectation of desert failure, which they shattered with 2 hours of bloody iron. From these waters to the great oceans, the rule remains immutable. He who possesses the will and refines the plan, possesses the right to victory and memory. Abdullah ibn Saad, the man who came from where there is no sea and went toward the infinite, leaving a battle that immortalized him as an admiral. He did not die defeated, and those who die undefeated need no tombstone, for the waves of the Mediterranean shall recite his epic anthem for all eternity's end.